Welcome to Guide to Youth with Reha and Father D. Today's show is about Pope Francis. He's been in the news a lot. He has very different views from most people. Pope Francis tackled many hot-button issues before being elected Pope. The practice of shuffling pedophile priests was stupid, according to Pope Francis. Feminism is machismo in skirts, and priestly celibacy could change, and more. Before he became Pope, Francis spoke his mind about many of the most sensitive topics the Roman Catholic Church faces today. Roman Catholic priests take vows of celibacy. Some Catholics say they should be allowed to marry like Eastern Rite Catholic priests. For the moment, the Pope said, I'm in favor of maintaining celibacy with its pros and cons because there have been 10 centuries of good experiences rather than failures. It's a question of discipline, not of faith. It could change. On clergy abuse, Francis say punishing the priest is more important than protecting the church's image. We must never turn a blind eye. I do not believe in taking positions that uphold a certain corporate spirit to avoid damaging the image of the institution. That solution was proposed once in the United States. They proposed switching the priest to a different parish. It is a stupid idea. That way the priest just takes the problem with him wherever he goes. Francis is against abortion from the moment of conception. Francis also believes in sex education if done holistically, with love and not just sex in mind. And about contraception, Francis thinks many Catholics are too obsessed about it. How are you today, Father D?
I'm doing good. How are you doing, Reha?
Okay, pretty good. Today we want to talk about our new Pope and what makes him different about, what is different about him from the previous Pope. Pope Francis is considered by some to be contemporaneous to the arrival of the false prophet, also called the Antichrist.
Well, yeah, I've heard these stories. There's lots of prophecy, lots of, ideas that float around, especially during times when there's change, such as the Pope or even a government change and things of this nature. But I wouldn't read too much into these things because you can make prophecy say almost anything you want to.
This is true. And indeed, the Jewish Kabbalah, the Zohar, a collection of books written in medieval Aramaic over 700 years ago containing mystical commentary on the 5 books of Moses, states in the Vera section, volume 3, section 34, that the signs heralding the Messiah or the coming of the Messiah are set in late 2012. Given the rejection of Jesus by Orthodox Jews as Messiah, Christians understand this coming would herald the unveiling of Antichrist in 2012. There is a phenomenon in Christianity called the Great Tribulation, which is also called the time of Jacob's trouble, and which some Catholic scholars say begins with the election of Petrus Romanus, the last pope, and will commence, according to the ancient text of the Torah, with the year 2012, when the kings of the earth gather in Rome, possibly during a papal conclave, and are killed by fiery stones or missiles from the sky. That sounds a little bit out there, but this is what some people are thinking. So the prophecy in the Zohar, given by Jews hundreds of years, separate from the divination of the last pope, is amazing when compared with the Catholic prediction. The final pope, Peter the Roman, whose reign ends in the destruction of Rome, will assume authority during the time of Great Tribulation, and then the city of 7 hills will be destroyed. and the terrible and fearsome judge will judge his people. Now, all this is based on this ancient rabbinical dissertation that claims that Rome will be destroyed by the Jewish calendar year 5773, which in our calendar begins with the new moon of September 2012 and concludes a year later. And this is important because some people consider Pope Francis as the last pope. He's supposed to be a contemporary of the Antichrist, which is the Jewish Messiah, and is called the Antichrist by Christians. And so in the year 5773, which corresponds with 2012, September to September 2013, according to the Jewish Torah, the kings of the world will assemble in the city of Rome, and the Holy One will shower on them fire and hail and meteoric stones until they're all destroyed, with the exception of those who will not yet have arrived there. Is this hinting at the destruction of Mystery Babylon? Not all kings, according to prophecy, will be destroyed. Of those remaining, these will commence anew to make other wars. So any way you look at it, it's bad news. From that time, the Messiah will begin to declare himself. The Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, is considered by Christians to be the Antichrist. And round him there will be gathered many nations and many hosts from the uttermost ends of the earth. So if our mathematical calculations of the Jewish calendar are correct, then between September 2012 and September 2013, we're going to see a lot of important historical events come to life. And now back to the Pope. What makes Pope Francis so fascinating to so many people? Father D., what do you know about the Pope?
Well, I know this Pope is a really a divergence from the previous popes of recent times in many ways. Some ways he's not, but in a lot of ways he is. He's a man that's humble, that's taken a very much low-key approach to the papacy than his predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI, as well as Pope John Paul II. Pope Francis, as you notice, there's not a number after his name because he's the first Francis that's ever been Pope. So he's just referred to as Francis. And he took that name after Francis of Assisi, who was himself a very humble and pious poor friar, a brother monk, who taught peace and taught kindness to the poor, and also was a very considerate of animals and the environment. So he's taken a very different stance, and many people find it very refreshing. He's not a man that puts forward his authority with great vigor, but a man who has a very gentle authority. He's not even living in the papal state, in the papal palace. He lives in a hotel at the present time, and it looks like he's going to probably continue living there in a suite there. He makes his own food. He rides the bus. He gives the Secret Service there at the Vatican, the Swiss Guard, great headaches because he's a man of the people. He's a pope of the people. And he's referring to himself as the Bishop of Rome. He even refrains from referring to himself too much as Pope or as the Vicar of Christ, which are lawful titles that the Pope could utilize. So he is really a different kind of Pope. And in some ways, this may be alarming to some because he's so different from the rest. But to many, it's refreshing. Although he does still hold very conservative views, he still believes that which the Church believes and teaches that. He's much more compassionate in his approach to it. So I see some good things. He's very open to other faiths, particularly those within the Christian realm, reaching out to evangelical Protestants as well, especially to the Eastern Orthodox churches. And it was known and made prevalent by the attendance of the Patriarch of Constantinople, Bartholomew, who came to his papal enthronement. So this hadn't happened since 1,000 years ago when the church was still one. So there's a lot of interesting things going on with this pope. But there is one thing I would point out is these prophecies that seem to indicate the end of the papacy, end of the city of Rome, and the Church of Rome, are placated on an ancient prophecy by a Malachi, an Irish fellow and monk, and there's some speculation to whether or not this work was even actually done by him. So there's lots of sketchy things. But the one thing that we can't ignore is that the last pope was to be named Peter. And as you can tell, this pope's named Francis. So that seems to avert the whole problem there with the end of the world and the apocalypse happening with this election of this new pope. Perhaps, maybe, just maybe, some good things can come forward from it, one would hope.
Thank you, Father D, and thanks for listening. Everyone, this is Reha and Father D with another presentation of Guide to Youth. There you have it, your dope on the Pope.